Welcome, listeners, to www.ironradio.org, the website and podcast for all things strength sports and sports nutrition. Thanks for listening. Okay, everybody, welcome to another episode of Iron Radio. This is Lonnie Lowry, a professor of about 20 years, a food industry and academic consultant, and a former competitive bodybuilder.
Hey, it's Dr. Mike Nelson, creator of the Flex Diet Cert and the Phys Flex Cert, and associate professor at the Kerrigan Institute, and just getting ready to start driving down to Texas. I'll be down there kiteboarding, hanging out in South Padre most of November-ish, and then actually flying out from there to do a conference in Connecticut at the end of the month also for the NEC.
Oh, cool.
This is Coach Farrell out of Stringfield in Kansas City. I specialize in just getting people as strong as humanly possible.
Nothing wrong with that. All right. We have three little bits of news, and rather than do a deep dive, I just thought I'd bring each one up and then get everybody's opinion. And then after the break, everybody, we're going to talk about transitioning from beginner to intermediate. Just give some input about what people probably do right or what maybe they don't do right as far as expectations, stuff like that. So what's in the news? Most of this stuff is nutrition from my perspective. We're going to talk about fiber, whey protein, and creatine. So those are things that I think a lot of lifters think about. There's a new paper. In fact, these first two are new papers in the Journal of Nutrition, which is really a top-tier journal from the ASN, the American Society of Nutrition. This first one says experimental capacity of human fecal microbiota, right? So the bacteria in your mostly large intestines to degrade fiber and produce short-chain fatty acids is associated with diet quality and with anthropometric measures. This is Malinowska and colleagues, Anna Malinowska, brand spanking new, fall 2023 at least. So the background here, short-chain fatty acids are considered beneficial to human health. So if you're not really looking at this literature, and you know what, until I started working in the food industry, I didn't care as much until I started thinking about, prebiotic, probiotic, postbiotic, right? What are the good guys, especially bacteria in your mostly large intestine? What are they making that's so good? Some of those things are the short-chain fatty acids. So, acetate, butyrate, propionate. And these have all kinds of effects, right? Because they can actually enter your bloodstream or help with this whole gut-brain communication, or a big part of your immune system. You'll hear because of gut-associated lymph tissue in your digestive system, in your GI tract. So huge links with mood, immunity, all this stuff. Anyway, I'm just going to go long story short instead of deep dive. This is just a cross-sectional study. They looked at diet from food records, and they looked at some just simple, waist and hip girth and that kind of stuff, and how well that associated with their ability to actually make short-chain fatty acids, these healthy things. Because butyrate, for example, it's a fuel for the intestinal cells in your gut. That can be a good thing. It can help maintain that barrier, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, conclusions. We confirm that high intake of fiber-rich products is positively associated with the capacity of your poop microbiota, essentially, to degrade soluble and insoluble fiber, and then to produce, in this case, they looked at propionic acid, so one of the short-chain fats. And again, it's one of the mechanisms, one of the reasons why you're eating the fiber. But interestingly, they said the capacity to produce propionic acid was significantly negatively associated with hip circumference. So bigger hips, less ability to make short-chain fats. Now, to me, this sort of begs the question, right, because it's correlational. You don't know which direction is driving what. If you have fatter hips, does that mean you have, poorer microbiota in your intestines and less ability to make these healthy short-chain fats? Or is it the reverse, that because you're making fewer of these short-chain fats, you yourself are becoming fatter through the butt and hips, if that makes any sense? So it's hard to tell what's going on with this. But the other takeaway here, and I think the bigger one, is unless you're having one of these diets that is not a Western diet, right? I think about what Charles Staley said years and years ago, like, look what everybody else is doing and do the opposite. I think he was one of the ones that would say that. So nuts, seeds, fruits, if you're not doing that, you're coaching the gut bacteria to not be able to make some of these short chain fats well. And the reason I bring this up is because, Mike, you remember way back in the day, they did that like transfection experiment in rodents where they got fat rats and lean rats. They put the bacteria from the fat rats in lean rats and they got fat, real fat. And then they started saying, oh my God, this is a huge impact, maybe even more than your genes, as far as the outcomes. I guess this isn't that surprising. What are your thoughts on this, Mike, as far as, anthropometrics and diet and short chain fats and all that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I view it as, like you said, kind of preliminary data, right? And as you know, to try to publish a study, we want to try to see what it's associated with, which is a good, first question to ask. But it begs the question about, is there causality? Like, which way is the road going? Because I think for people listening to this podcast, that's more interesting and potentially a lot more actionable then too. So if that turns out to be true, could you use a supplement or add more of these fibers in your diet? Would you get smaller hips then? Maybe if it turns out to be shown that way. So yeah, I think it's interesting, but I would imagine if you went online, there's all sorts of people that have already jumped to that conclusion.
That direction,
so,
yeah.
Yeah, that's my kind of fear with it. But yeah, it's still interesting, and I also just think highlights how much of the gut stuff, and I'm not an expert at all in that area, but man, it just still seems like there's so much there we don't know. It feels like exercise physiology 20, 30 years ago, which is both exciting and also kind of scary at the same time because you don't know what you don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're almost presenting diet quality separately from anthropometrics, right? From body shape and all that. The truth is, if you eat lots of vegetables, fruits, nuts, and seeds, over time you're probably not going to be as fat as somebody living on Big Macs and fries.
Yeah.
So there's that too. But I guess one takeaway for me might be, and Jarrell, I'll have to ask you how you deal with this, but when we talked about diet quality the other week, and we were just talking about making a frozen bag of vegetables disappear, do something to improve your diet quality, especially because a lot of these guys, especially athletes, they do just live on fast food, But yeah, try introducing fruits, veg, nuts, seeds, something you like, something you can stick with, one step in the right direction, and do that for several weeks. It's not going to happen overnight. To repopulate your gut on some level. It's not like you're completely repopulating it in the way you want, but you're encouraging things in the right direction. How much of your clients, Jarrell, are even worried about diet quality or body fat? I mean, are they just about, lift more weights, bro, or are they more trying to take care of themselves and move in the right direction like body comp and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, the majority of my clients are just more like gin pop clients, I would just say. So as far as like how I deal with it, the food quality thing is, I mean, that's not super high on the list necessarily for me, just because they don't have consistent diet habits. So I always start with the habits first. Then as they get through to like the next phase, right? So I usually break it down into phases. So like phase 1, I start with protein, and then phase 2, we'll add some other stuff in. And there's where I usually put in the, like, hey, you need to like base this on meat and veggies and not just, whatever. So that way you have a system that you're making an adjustment to. And then also, I mean, with veggies, it is more about like what you enjoy. Like, if you have to choke down something you hate every single day, like you're not, like everything will fall apart at some point. So I generally just try to get something people enjoy and like tell them to stick with it and like add that to as much stuff as you can. But otherwise it's kind of like, and that's further down the list, even though like we know here it's important. My thing is, if there's no system in place, that's what makes it hard for me, like in terms of behavior. It's tough for me to add something to no system and then reverse engineer it. So for us, it's a little far down the list, but it's certainly on there. We do talk about it, and it usually ends up phase 2, phase 3 clients that I end up applying this stuff the most with.
Right. Yeah. It makes sense. I do think it's neat from a science perspective that normally when we think body comp, at least I do, I think about endocrine, like think with bodybuilders and powerlifters, and they like to abuse hormones, not everybody, of course, but they, why do they get on the gas? Because they're trying to manipulate androgens and that kind of stuff. It's hormonal, but this is another mechanism that has a big impact on body fatness. And it just makes me wonder, what level of dysbiosis do people have? You got a client like, I'm stuck and I feel like I'm eating well and I'm here in the gym 3-4 times a week. What's my deal? And, this is an interesting way to look about this. Maybe if they were to increase their diet quality for a month or two, if you could get them plugged in, some like your tiered system drill, like where do we start to introduce some of this stuff? Because you could be correcting this mechanism that has this huge impact on your body fat. And people don't really think about it that way. They go, now it's kind of like to Mike's point though. Oh, well, why would somebody, inject hundreds of milligrams or a gram or way more than a gram of testosterone every week? Well, because they can just add that to the picture. Yeah, I guess that it is the system in a sense, but they're just kind of adding to it. Well, what if you were able to add the right bacteria, right? And that's why people are interested in probiotics and that kind of stuff. So far, though, I don't see any kind of fiber and probiotic manipulations having the impact of an endocrine manipulation like that. But it could be one of those things that you're really stuck and you're like, I can't get lean. Maybe there's something going on here. I know we've all talked about people underreporting and stuff too. Like, I swear I eat nothing but chicken and yams and green beans. Sure you do.
For one day, but do you do that every day?
Yeah. Yeah. Do the math and you're going to be disappointed how long you're going to have to do that to see something happen. It's going to be months. Anyway. All right. So that was one. The other one was same Journal of Nutrition, same day. It's like late summer or early fall. Whey protein enriched and carb rich breakfasts attenuate the insulin response to an ad libitum, so kind of at will, lunch relative to extended morning fasting. And this is a randomized crossover trial. So it says typical breakfast foods are rich in carbs. So they don't only elevate blood glucose during the morning, but they elicit a second meal effect that can attenuate blood glucose responses in the afternoon. So they set out to do this. They did a randomized crossover design with 12 healthy men and women. So young men, regular body mass index, all that kind of stuff. Again, I don't want to do a big deep dive, but the results were that the protein-enriched breakfast reduced the morning blood sugar response compared to the carb-rich breakfast. That's not surprising. You eat some protein instead of, a big bowl of Lucky Charms, I guess. It says, despite similar energy intakes at lunch in all three conditions, post-lunch insulin responses were markedly reduced when breakfast had been consumed that were either protein-rich or carb-rich relative to when the lunch was consumed after an overnight fasted state. Okay, so they're talking about having these exaggerated insulin responses if you fast all morning, essentially. It says, conclusion, breakfast consumption attenuates the insulin responses to a subsequent meal, achieved with consumption of energy-matched breakfast, typically high in carbohydrates or enriched with whey protein isolate, relative to extended morning fasting. And what this suggests to me, at least on the very surface, and Mike, I know you do look into this kind of stuff, but the intermittent fasting diets and that kind of stuff, to me, despite all the strategies, oftentimes homeostasis ruins our plans. So like you don't eat all morning. Is this study suggesting that you're having this big insulin response because your body's in storage mode? You're like, oh my God, I didn't eat breakfast all morning. I'm going to store every gram of what I consume at lunch or after lunch. What would your take be from this, that you have a bigger insulin response later in the day if you do morning fasting?
That would be my guess. I mean, my guess is it is probably just trying to quote unquote make up, for what happened earlier. The other big caveat, I actually saw this one. I just perused through it real quick. I didn't read it in great detail yet, but it's on my to-read list once I get through some deadlines here. I would be super curious how much exercise or even just movement affects that. Because what I've noticed with clients, there's some data to support this, that if you get up and even do some light movement in the morning, and those people who fast for a longer period of time, or these are all metabolically healthy people, seem to do okay. But if I've had people who are general population, metabolic health, maybe a little bit more questionable, they have a very hard time skipping a meal without the rest of the day turning into a disaster.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
They can do it. Like, you can white knuckle your way through it. It's not a willpower issue or anything. It's just, more often than not, it just seems like the wheels fall off later in the day. So I've actually, probably the last couple of years, transitioned to most people, especially for general population, eating breakfast, I think, is better. Now, with some of those people, caveat, I do have them do a progressively longer fast, probably once per week, trying to get them to do 19 to 24 hours with, just consumption of fluid and electrolytes, that type of thing. But even that is still very progressive, may take 6 to 8 weeks. I don't want them to have a huge overcompensation after, so we're trying to, control the meal they have once they're done with their fast. So, yeah, that's the one part I would be curious in this study, and that would kind of match up with the study that maybe your insulin, your glucose, your cortisol, all those things get a little bit more wonky if you're just kind of waiting. And last part too, we know that most people are also very sleep deprived, and we know that there is some, I would say, backup circadian effects to meal timing. Again, I don't believe a lot of the animal rodent studies transfer that well to humans because rodents and mice are very sensitive to light day cycles. But I do think that the meal timing kind of serves as this backup circadian regulating system after light. And most people I've noticed don't get a lot of sunlight in the morning. Their circadian rhythms are kind of dysregulated, and now they push out a meal that would be kind of serving as a backup regulator to that, and they just appear to get more dysregulated throughout the day.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, again, we're not doing deep dives. I don't know how fit these people are. Their body mass index is 24. They're 22 years old. So
yeah, it's pretty young people, if I remember right. I don't remember the specifics, though.
Everything looks pretty reasonable. I mean, their weight for height, the breakfast were, I think, like 750 calories or something.
Yeah.
Pretty straightforward kind of thing. It's a really good point you make, though. This is just about the endocrine aspects of all this. Right. What about the double whammy of behavior? So you skip breakfast. Your body is in storage mode, waiting to dump insulin, for example. And again, we're kind of just riffing on this, right? Because I don't know where they're going with this. They may be suggesting that the higher insulin response is good. I don't know. From a body comp perspective, though, probably not. But yeah, so you skip lunch and then you go nuts, or you skip breakfast rather, and then maybe even part of lunch or delay lunch. Then when you do eat, you go nuts and your body's in storage mode. Oh boy. Right. That's just a double whammy of behavioral and hormonal body fatness. So, I think it would be really hard. I know there's a lot of the intermediate fasting studies that suggest that overall you consume less calories.
Right.
But I've always liked the approach that you did. In fact, last time I competed, that's what I did. On Fridays, I just sipped whey protein water throughout the day. And I mean sipped. I wasn't trying to get, 40 grams at a pop or anything like that. Just to try to get out from under the weekly insulin burden, right? Because especially when you're overeating and bodybuilding and stuff like that, when you're dieting, you're not overeating, but you're still, eating regularly and blah, blah, blah. So, Jarrell, do you have people that do intermediate fasting? Do you just try to say, listen, I know you're talking about like your tiers and having, people need a system and all that, but do they come to you and, you've got certain weight training goals for them. Do they come to you with this kind of pro and con baggage?
Yeah. Oh yeah. If the diet has a name and it has some sort of magic substance associated with it, heck yeah, they come to me all the time. My thing with intermittent fasting is I focus more on like what the lifestyle is. Like it's like for me, I would love to like just do something simple for breakfast. But I mean, I'm waking up at, 4. It just is not that feasible to get something in that quickly necessarily. So it's more a matter of like what fits your lifestyle and what can you stick to. I mean, so I have had some people here recently and I mean, not my favorite thing, but it's like they, for some reason, have started like just tracking their like glucose and stuff. And so they've gotten almost obsessed with like trying to keep that number down. And it's like, no, there's a time and a place. Like explaining that part, I think helps people kind of understand like, okay, well, if you give them like the first hurdle for most of my newer clients is getting enough protein throughout the day. So if you start with that, like that tends to fix a lot of the problems before we go to like that next thing. Um, but yeah, I don't force it, think about it, or like encourage it necessarily. It can help if it's like, if you're just rushing through everything and you're trying to, have breakfast and do all these things and it's causing more stress than not, then I'm like, yeah, well, you can skip that meal. Just get your total number in of macros each day. And then we can kind of work on it from there. Where I'd be curious about this though is, people who do like shift work or like have very weird schedules, because when the sleep cycle is dysfunctional, I'm always curious of how much that affects the like kind of baseline of this type of study, because this is I mean, it sounds like relatively fixed in terms of like when they get sleep versus, I have a pharmacist who, and his schedule is almost flips every 4 days. So, which obviously terrible. I mean, but in terms of like for the circadian rhythms, but I'd be curious to see more about something like how that insulin effect is impacted when you kind of make the sleep cycle topsy turvy. Like, does your body kind of react in a way similar if you have like a fasted, you know, sleep when you like during the day? Like, say he has to sleep during the day or whatever. I'm always curious about that.
Yeah. You know what? These were young people. I do think they need to put, even in the abstract, if they can squeeze it in for the word count, what kind of activity level they have. Because like Mike was saying, that's huge as far as, depositing blood glucose where it belongs in your muscles and all that. Just overall glucose tolerance. Yeah. Presumably they're young, healthy, well slept. I would think also the youth thing. The older I get, the more I think about this, of course. But like your pharmacy guy, I'm guessing he's not 22 years old, so he may be more at risk. When you're in middle age, your carbohydrate metabolism suffers anyway. So like my A1Cs are higher than when I was young. It's stuff like that, and you can exercise and try to correct a lot of that. But I would think even like to your point, people that are swing shift or flipped shift and older would be even more at risk. I mean, in an advanced exes class I used to teach, we actually, one of the students would volunteer to not sleep one night or almost not sleep. And then we did some like fasting blood sugars. We didn't run insulins or anything. We didn't have the ability to do that. But it didn't really faze them that much because I think they're so young and they're so fit that their body can compensate. Whereas the swing shift thing, it's going to get worse as you get older would be my guess. That's just a guess. But
yeah, that's what I've seen from a little bit of the literature is that as you get older and less fit, you become a lot more sensitive to that. And then I have worked with a fair amount of people who do, shift work, whether it's doctors, nurses, special ops people, military, that kind of stuff. And if at all possible, which I know a lot of hospital settings, it's not, but I'm a lot more strict with them on meal timing and then setting up their meals especially if they have to flip back and forth. The hardest ones, like you said, 3 to 4 day schedule on, and then another couple days you're on the direct opposite. And I just want to strangle whoever does these schedules because it's the stupidest thing most of the time. But getting them to flip as efficiently as possible. And then we try to leave their meal timing literally the same as much as they humanly can, whether it's day or night. And that seems to help. The other part I have added, you have to be really careful with it, is high intensity interval training when they're more awake. There was a very cool study, I think it was Martin Gabalia's lab, I could be wrong, that used high intensity interval training after sleep deprivation, and it reset almost all their glucose and insulin mechanics.
Wow.
The caveat, though, is you have to time that with when they're going to be awake, because for a lot of people that can keep them up, so you don't want to do it before they would go to bed. But I've had them do just like, 2 wing gates on a rower, literally 30 seconds all out, and that's it. I think I don't have any blood work from some of those people, but, some of those things can help alter it. The last part is that shift work itself is considered a carcinogen. So no matter what, I also talk to them about, okay, how long are you going to keep doing this?
Right.
And that's a value long-term decision that they kind of have to decide, because you can do the best you can, but you're still going to have a very hard time just getting back to baseline. Right.
That reminds me of what my brother used to say. He's like, Lonnie, we got to hit it hard now while we're young and strong. And he would talk about that with work too. He, work like that has taken a huge toll on him. Let's just say that.
I can imagine.
Did he make a lot of money? Yeah, he made a crap ton of money, but now he's roughly 50 years old. Yeah. And he's struggling with a bunch of health problems. Yeah. That's a good point. Like, we know I hadn't actually seen the carcinogenic stuff. I totally believe that. But cardiometabolic and everything else, Nurses Health Study, all that stuff for years. Yep. It's not cool. So how long you're going to do it? That's a great question to ask clients. I do want to say one last thing, and that's that whey protein seemed to have a comparable effect to the high carb breakfast. So if you are interested in body comp,
by that.
I am too, to some extent. It's almost like we are both speculating, like your body just wants to eat.
Yeah.
And if you're not swallowing something, it'll try to compensate later. And again, we're kind of abusing the study. I suggest anybody just go read it if you want. It's Harry Smith and colleagues. Telling listeners it's Smith et al. Doesn't really help much.
None of those in PubMed.
Right. But, this is sort of the thing that even when I would cut carbs, I always left about 50 grams of carbs in my breakfasts, like oats and berries with whey protein on there, But even this almost suggests that kind of pulse fasting stuff that I used to do when I competed might be a decent idea. That at least you're getting in. I was just sneaking in some amino acids to try to preserve my muscles, because I was hormonally challenged compared to a lot of the other guys in open competitions. But yeah, I mean, if protein is a decent proxy, that's pretty cool. So anyway, all right. I am not going to go on about the creatine paper. We can discuss that next week because I think we're out of time. I will say this. Interesting stuff that's been produced with creatine for anti-inflammatory effects and anti-catabolic effects. And so I'm interested in that kind of stuff, especially now. I didn't tell you guys, but oh God, I just blew out my right ankle. Old surgical repair,
no.
Black and blue. 20 years ago, I had, reconstruction, and oh my God. And I sprained it 3 times, like brutal inversion injury. Oh God. So I don't know, maybe I don't want to go on about, more old guys belly aching. Oh, my old surgery repairs are falling apart. But, I know that those surgeries aren't meant to last forever. And I had that done when I was like, I don't know, early 30s. So now I'm in my mid 50s and it let go. So, oh man, I know I'm just, I'm going to have to schedule a surgery and go through a boot this fall and all that crap. Right now, I'm literally taping it so I can just walk into the office kind of thing, just so I can walk around. But anyway, the anti-inflammatory things it kind of struck me because I'm like, oh, I'm dealing with some of that right now. And I never really thought about my creatine being anti-inflammatory. But there's even the idea of anti-catabolic effects. And not just, trying to get swole, bro, and hydrate your muscles and look round and full and all that kind of stuff, but actually trying to reduce muscle breakdown. We were just talking about like how you deal with fast periods of fasting, and maybe, getting some creatine into that mix could be a good thing, because there's cool stuff that I was surprised with limiting muscle breakdown. And it looks like mostly in men, which was weird. But anyway, we could talk more about that later.
Match the casting atrophy reduction studies with creatine too that have been replicated a fair amount now too.
Oh yeah, no, good point. Yeah, good point. Like you could look at muscle volume and stuff, and not just some of these urinary markers. Okay, let's go to break, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about progression models. I think, especially from beginner to intermediate. Hey everybody, Iron Radio is back, and in an expanded way. What can you expect? Well, first, you can get it simulcast every week on the nutritionradio.org network, as well as on the original podcast. It'll appear regularly on iTunes, Spotify, and all your favorite podcasting sites. We have a new Iron Radio / Nutrition Radio Facebook page as well. Please check us out. We're even backed up on YouTube. Second, please tell your friends who are longtime loyal listeners that they may see emails that share just the episode link and the show notes. This is a new thing, and we hope it will build community. Third, if you were a supporting member in the past, we may prompt you to resume through PayPal, but we will confirm each and every donor before reinstating that membership category. We'll never just restart your $4 auto payments without agreement from you. And of course, we will accept new members moving forward as well. Starting back slowly and honorably is the goal. And lastly, expect the sister show Nutrition Radio to expand into once weekly 45 to 60-minute episodes with guest co-hosts covering the same nerdy nutrition news that's been broadcast for a few months now in daily 10-minute clips. We hope that an expanded presence will get you the news, education, banter, and guests that's made Iron Radio's community so loyal from the start. You are appreciated. Can you guys hear my cat?
I heard the cat.
She's kitty. 8 pounds, little tiny thing. Meow.
Is that a new kitty?
No, we've had her for a while, but she's
okay.
She's the one that she was the rescue. Her little had her femoral head removed. I can't believe they do that in animals, but
Jesus.
Apparently because she was almost crushed when she was a kitten. But they remove it, and I guess I asked the vet about that. She goes, "Yeah, it's fine. She'll limp, and if she sprints or jumps, no problem. But when she walks slowly." She has a false joint. The vet's like, "Oh yeah, they just form a soft tissue false joint because you literally don't have the femoral head interacting,
right.
And because she said if they don't do that, it'll pop in and out, and she'll be in pain her whole life." I'm like, wow. So you just freaking remove it? So yeah, the proximal part of her femur is just rounded off and nipped off, and it's amazing that they form a false joint like that. Because you sure as hell not going to do that in people.
No.
Of course, we're bipedal.
Yeah.
We kind of need those legs. Anyway, yeah, she can be vocal. It's funny.
And welcome back to Iron Radio. Got Coach Durrell, Dr. Lonnie Lowry, and myself. And as the topic of the day, we're going to talk a little bit about training and what you would do from kind of a beginner to intermediate and even beyond. And the thing that bugs me is like people get one part of a concept right, but then they almost extend it past its lifetime. So people understand that you need some form of progression. You need some form of, progressive overload, but you can't do that indefinitely in a linear fashion. And there's been, countless articles written about just, add 5 pounds to your bench press each week you go to the gym. And yeah, if you're brand new, you can kind of do that for a little while. But if you've ever tried that approach, which is useful at the beginning, you soon realize that, oh, yeah, I might get squashed by a bench press coming up. So I was just curious with your thoughts, Darrell, like how do you handle that kind of with your lifters? Do you do a lot more linear periodization, I'm guessing, at first? And then how long do you kind of let that run? And what do you do then?
Yeah, I mean, so the beginners, I almost try not to get them to, forget about like what the load is on the bar because I'll just wave different rep ranges in there. So I like to see people do 10s, 5s, 3s is typically like my, vibe. So if they're handling their 10 rep stuff, I know what their 5 rep stuff should be, and then kind of have an idea what their 3 rep stuff should be, and then vice versa. So I just kind of flow through those just to know what they can be handling. I do try to get them to add weight each week in some way, shape, or form. But a lot of times what I'll do is like I'll start with 10s, and then for the 10s next, 2 weeks of 10s, then 2 weeks of 8s. So I know that they can go heavier, and there's no like necessarily like huge pressure to do it. Same thing with 5s, 3s, and all that stuff. But the way I think about it more is like, so when you're a beginner, you're really making progress essentially daily, because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of it's neural, a lot of it's muscular. So you can essentially add weight each time, like the starting strength 3x5, add
Yeah.
5 pounds each time. Well, eventually you have to just add 5 pounds each week, and then each month, and so on and so forth. So I kind of just have like a little Excel system that makes sure I keep the total volume of reps going. Like I have like a little system because I want the tonnage per month to go up. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
main thing I focus on. And that helps with both lower level lifters and higher level lifters for me, because then I have like a stair step model instead of a forced going up model. Like you're just forcing extra weight on the bar. So let's say you have 3 weights, and we'll just use this to keep it simple: 135, 185, 225. You'll do a lot of reps with like those weights in that little training block. We'll call it a month. But some days you'll have that volume go pretty high. Some days it'll be low. Sometimes the intensity and the volume will be uncoupled. So sometimes we'll go heavy and high volume, like higher intensity, higher volume, and some days not. And then when we test, we'll just add essentially, 20 to 30 pounds for it on whatever it is. With beginners, that's monthly. They're going to go up monthly, like by a lot, like 30 pounds or so. Intermediates, it's going to be like a 12-week cycle, and then they'll, 20 to 30 pounds every 12 weeks or 3 months. And then when you start getting, the more advanced you get is like, you're then trying to, squeak out an extra kilo over 4 years or something like that. Like that's like the long end. So I try to track the monthly tonnage or the monthly volume, kind of like the Russians used to. So that it helps a lot with, identifying goals and like getting people to like that next level, and hopefully getting them focused about moving the weight well as opposed to what's on the bar. That's another thing I like to do it for.
Yeah, it's a good point about quality of work. And I think that's probably one of the hardest things to get through to people, because like I even give people like you can get a PR in quality of work also, even though it's kind of this ethereal thing. And if you're a coach, like you can normally see it, but for someone to equate it to themselves is also kind of difficult, because I made the mistake early on where I was probably a little bit too aggressive with people in terms of overload. And then when I started getting videos of them on their AMRAP days and stuff, I was like, whoa, what the rep 3 of 8 was, wee, yikes. So I think it was just they were too aggressive trying to just beat what was on paper all the time. And then, of course, they end up with little niggly injuries, and, things are annoying and they don't feel good. And then they have to take an extended amount of time off, and you're doing the wrong motor patterns. And yeah, it usually just doesn't end well.
So yeah, I mean, and this is kind of, I mean, the system itself it's like the Plan Strong type system from like the Strong First guys or whatever. But the reason I like this a lot, especially with weightlifting, particularly with snatch and clean and jerk, it's like if you're searching for it to feel heavy, you already missed the lift. Like it's not going to happen. Like, so you have to find ways to at least encourage people to hit the lifts with the rhythm, tempo, and speed that you want to see. And I treat, squats the same. I don't really like the super grinded out squats. It's like, it's fine if it's a big PR for you. Like going from I mean, for most guys, like your first 405, right? Like your first time with 4 plates on the bar for a squat or whatever, that, big PR, I'm with it. Let's do it. But, or something like that. But anything else, I don't really like grinds in the gym. I like you to be able to train often. And I try to keep the percentages in that respect where it's like you could at least do, you know, let's say you're 10 rep max. My normal kind of number for that is like sets of 5. Like you should be doing sets of 5 with your 10 rep max and like moving that weight really well. And then you can do more reps like that, like more sets, more reps. And um, the more work, getting people to identify that the more work is better if they can just be patient. And I mean, this goes into delayed gratification and all that too. Like the more you can kind of delay, like hitting that quote unquote heavier weight, the better off you'll be. And it's tough at first because you will be stronger every week. Like, I mean, let's even just a squat or a bench, you're going to add 5 to 10 pounds every time. But the idea that you need to feel it will slow you down so much, like over time, that the person who just comes in and just kind of punches the clock a year from now will not only not be injured, but also be way stronger because they kept coming in. They didn't get grinded down. So that's where I deal with the problem the most is like, no, I don't want you to like add weight each week because then there's pressure to add weight each week. And then you start to lose sight of like what the rep looks like. And then before we know it, you're like way farther down the line. You're doing this weird good morning squat or something, missing the value.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to what are your ultimate goals, right? So in your case, if your ultimate goals for your lifters are to get better at Olympic lifting, at some point a 4 second heavy squat is probably not even going to transfer. And I get it that, like you said, if it's a big PR and it's something they've never done before, okay, cool, that's cool. But if you're just chasing numbers, I think it's easy to get caught up in chasing these accessory lifts and watching the quality degrade and then looking and going, whoa, well, why didn't this transfer to my main goals? It's like, well, one, it doesn't even look anything like a squat anymore. It's a more squat morning thing, and that's probably not going to transfer real well either.
I mean, there's value to it at first. I mean, one of the most so there's 2 periods where I made the most progress. And the first one was like, I was doing more of the Texas method, which was like, it's 5x5 Monday. Yeah, the Wednesday, that was like a lighter day. And then Friday, that was like your heavy 5. And I was like, so there's like 175, 180. That's what I weighed. And I was like determined to get to 200 plus. I couldn't put weight on for anything. So I was doing like the gallon of milk a day, most days, not every day, but most days. And like just like in that 12, and it was like 12 weeks. So in that 12-week period, I got to just barely above 200 pounds and put a ton of like, I mean, maybe it was like on my heavy 5 itself, it was like 60 or 70 pounds I put on that.
Nice.
So if you're doing it with your nutrition, like your food, or, you don't have to do the gallon of milk a day. I don't recommend that. But if you're doing it with a higher calorie intake, great. It will probably work in that way, shape, or form. But no one I get now, like walking in their door, if I tell them to eat as much as that I expect for that to work, that is a big hard, like that's a tough sell. Like the eating enough part is a tough sell to make that a thing. Now, like the kids I have, I mean, again, that's already a tough sell. Like the teens, anytime we put them on like the number, like, all right, let me see what you're eating in MyFitnessPal. They're like, oh, I'm eating so much food you don't understand. I'm like, okay, let me see it. And it's always 1,000 calories short or something like that. It's like, dude, you gotta eat way more. So if you're doing it with the nutrition, it is great. It is a fantastic way to kind of go about it. But I more so like manipulating the volume and stuff like that in the concept of the training cycle. And then I just test more frequently with the younglings or with the newbies. But when you have athletes who are like my highest level athletes, I don't even say necessarily highest level athletes right now because, I mean, they're masters athletes. And I mean, I hope earmuffs, if you're listening to this, athletes, they've already hit their peak. So it's not like we're trying to get to, just short or just in the neighborhood. I mean, we're not even hardly testing for 12 weeks. I might let them go heavy, like test on a heavy day, but the goal is to do that as chill as possible, not excited.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And basically what I do is I just alternate volume, density, and intensity. And on really advanced people or people I've worked with for quite a while, they'll almost auto-select that themselves. So for like myself, like if I'm still, working on axle deadlift or things I've been working on for many years at this point, if I can add, 3 more reps to 2 more reps even to just the total volume of what I did before at that weight, I'm pretty happy with that, but I'm also not very bright. I'll take like an hour and 10 minutes to, just do an axle deadlift, kettlebell swings, and push-ups or something, and Axel, I got 2 more reps at 255 than I did a week ago. Hey, that's great. And people are like, you did that for an hour and 10 minutes. I'm like, well, you probably need more than 3 sets after you've been doing this for a while, but if you just track, like take your top, 2, 3, 4, 5 top goals and then just track volume, density, intensity. And what I've noticed is from doing this with people over many, many years is most of the time it's volume progression where you can make it. That'll kind of cap out and you can do the same amount of work in a little bit less time. And it's different for everyone. But if all those are going up, at some point you will lift a heavier load. Like it's not going to have to go up for eternity. Like it will transfer to a heavier load at some point, unless you're doing something crazy like 20 reps or, something where your strength isn't really a limiter. But I just rotate people through that. So we'll do a lot of repeated exposure of 3 sets again, 3 sets again, better density with 3 sets, 4 sets, 5 sets. And then when I look at their AMRAPs at the end of a progression, they'll give me a pretty good idea of where they're at, and if they're competitive, then if you feel good, towards the last couple of weeks, take a shot at a single, double, or a triple and see how you feel, and most of the time that tends to work pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting you talk about density and people self-selecting. I never really considered how much work I was doing per unit of time kind of deal. I would just look at volume and intensity, but I would self-select and I would find myself doing an additional set or the whole workout just took less time, and that was sort of just something that just happened as I think I became more fit. One of the things that I did, and this is post-competition, so some of our lifters might, listeners might laugh, but so I knew I could do like 2 1/4 in the bench for like sets of, 8, let's say. And so I would do 4 sets of 4 for a while. I would start by adding just maybe 1 extra rep. So maybe 3 sets of 4 and then a set of 5. I would just try to do an additional rep somewhere in there to build volume. But then with a bias toward adding another set, not building toward that 8 reps or anywhere near it, right? Yep. Add another set. And that was sort of an epiphany for me because I thought I can do this without exhausting myself. This kind of goes back to what Jarrell was saying. I can add more total volume in that weight range. Yeah, but I really wouldn't go by the time I was doing more than half of my work sets at 5 reps, I would just add another set, and do it like that. It kind of goes back to what we were saying the other week too about being fresh and quality of rep and all that kind of stuff. Instead of adding a sloppy repetition at the end of each set, I'm just like, okay, well, I'm mostly doing 5s now, set of sets of 4. I'll add a 5th set. And even if that's just a couple of reps, even if it's just 2 or whatever. But yeah, adding an additional set was something that I felt I could do more comfortably and then, add that additional volume in a certain intensity range and grow, I guess.
Yeah. I've gone out of out of my way to like try to keep the focus on like how the rep is moving. I mean, speaking of this, that kind of reminds me, I haven't done it in a long time where I'll just have people set a clock in like 15 or 20 minutes. Let's say 15 or 20 for set to 5 or, 10 minutes for triples or 5 minutes for singles. And then I would just set the weight and you would just like kind of casually try to get as many sets of that as you could in the time frame. And then I used to have standards for that. I don't anymore, but, you say, all right, if you're moving this many sets of 5 in 20 minutes, we can assume that, and go up from there. But the how the weight moves is kind of important. Part of my problem was I did that with like back when I owned a CrossFit gym with CrossFitters, and that was a huge mistake because they took it like as a AMRAP as opposed to like what I was aiming for. So I think that might have been why I scrapped it. But like, but that's an interesting one too. I forgot about that. Just like how much you can move, like how much total volume you can move in the 20 minutes with a high quality. So if you're doing 70%, say 70% for sets of 5 or something, I don't know, and then see how many good sets you get in 20 minutes. That takes a lot of coaching though. I don't know if that would be like a super useful thing if you're training on your own, but.
Yeah. I mean, the example I give people is if you can keep the rep quality high. So how I explain this to online clients is even if we programmed you 6 sets of an exercise, right? And I watch set 2 and I watch set 6, I should not be able to tell any difference between those two, right? It shouldn't look like if you go to the most gyms, like you just see it go off a cliff towards the end, right? In a perfect world, especially for strength, you can make a different argument for hypertrophy and single joint stuff, whatever. But for big, heavy, basic lifts that are kind of more performance orientated, you should be able to pop in and everything should look the same. So if you did only 3 sets, and let's say over time we get you to 6 sets, and let's say, like Lonnie was saying, we just leave it at reps of 4, we leave the weight the same, we've literally doubled the high quality volume you can do in a short period of time. And I think that form of a stimulus over time, I think, is very underrated because everyone got the DeLorme 3 sets of 10 from what was that study, 1958, I think is DeLorme. Like they just got that burned into their head. And I was the same way. I mean, I remember picking up the Poliquin principles in 1998 and him talking about 10 by 3 and, Bill Starr's 5 by 5. And I got his book around the same time. And my mind being blown by the fact there was something other than 3 by 10. Like you could do 4 sets of something. Oh my God, what are you talking about?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's all a good point. I mean, progression models are part of the art and the science. It's just something.
And I think the art component is also when do you go up and when do you not? And so I like having for myself little gates of, okay, if I can do this, then I've sort of earned the right to go to the next state, right? So I'm working on doing, 100-pound dumbbells for a set of 5. And the other day in the gym, my goal is, okay, I should be able to take the 95s and do, from my history, a set of 7, like an RP of an 8. Once I can do that, I can probably do a good-looking set of 5 with the hundreds. Right, so I have this, I could back that down to, it gets a little bit more sketchy, but 90s, I probably need to do a nice-looking set of 8 or 9, right? And after that, it gets really sketchy. But I kind of have these little gates that I sort of established for myself to know that, okay, I need to hit this number. Okay, now I can kind of have earned the right to increase the weight, especially, in my opinion, something like a dumbbell press is a little bit more higher risk because of the position and that type of thing. You're not in a cage and they're free moving and all that kind of stuff. And that's been helpful with people to explain to them that, okay, you probably need to hit this before you've kind of earned the right to hit that. And if I'm really worried about it, I'll have them send me a video of it. Like, okay, that looks good. Yeah, next week, if it feels good, go for this thing. So that way you kind of keep erring a little bit more on overload, but making sure the quality is still there.
Yeah. No, it's a good discussion because people need to think about how they do progress. and that it's not going to be this endlessly linear thing. I know this is your thing with so many things biologically, Mike.
Yeah.
Like human beings are built to think linearly. I think that served us well through evolution. You can go watch some of the old, like Neil deGrasse Cosmos and stuff. He talks about why we think like we do, but that's not how things usually work. There's going to be a plateau, and it's not a failure on anybody's behalf once they're intermediate. They've been training, let's say, for, I don't know, 2 or 3 years. They're in that beginning of the intermediate phase, and oh man, I'm not putting weight on every week. No, you're not. That's the principle of diminishing returns. That's how it works. We know that from textbook exercise physiology, But yeah, what are some ways around that? If like you said, Mike, if you can't just keep adding weight all the time, yes, it's progressive resistance training, but there's lots of ways to progress. Yes, more weight, but more volume, or even, the amount of work in a certain amount of time, which I guess it would be like total power in a session, So it's a neat idea.
Yeah. My last little 30-second point is, as you've been doing a lift longer, what I've noticed is the variability leading up to your peak might become more. Like what you can do on a day-by-day basis, like raising the floor, like we've talked about, will definitely go up. But for like the last time in spring when I got a PR on, say, double overhand axle, 7 days before I hit 280, 255 for a double was about all I could do. And at that point, I was pretty much convinced that I wasn't going to hit a PR. And then 6 or 7 days later, I did. Mm-hmm. So for listeners to keep that in mind too, that if what you can do, like kind of your floor, if that's going up over time, you're probably going to see more variability sometimes on a day-by-day basis. It doesn't mean that you're not making progress. You can have those days where it's just not there and feel like your whole program has fallen apart, and it probably hasn't. Like Adrell was saying, if you're doing more volume over time, your quality is good, and everything else is there, it's probably still there. It's just not there on that particular day, and that's okay.
So you're counseling patients, basically, with that. Like,
yeah.
Like, oh, I blew it. Yeah, I'm done. Right. It's a good point. Like Jarrell's checking in fairly rarely. I think that's where coaching comes in. Like, hey, I'm not going to check in and see where I plant the flag in the sand of Lonnie Lowry this year. It's like, well, that's not a good idea.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
I mean, with new people, it's just like the are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet?
Yeah.
And so trying to get them to an older age where it's like, no, we're not there. Just look at your iPad, shut up, and then we'll get there eventually.
Yeah, you got to be patient. Biology is messy. Yeah. All right, guys. All right, well, we'll see everybody next week, I guess.
Yeah.
Iron Radio is accepting donations. If you like what we do, the professors, the scientists, the bodybuilding show promoters, the athletes themselves in powerlifting and bodybuilding, please consider making a donation or maybe buying something from the ironradio.org store. We also are accepting supporting members. So for $4 a month, which is frankly less than the bank sneaks out of your account in fees, you can step up and support a form of sort of public radio for the bodybuilding and powerlifting and strength community.
The Iron Radio podcast and all of the audio on ironradio.org is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, it's important to check with your physician. Also seek the help of registered dietitians, athletic trainers, and qualified exercise physiologists in order to make the progress that you need.